There are so many easy, obvious examples of what's happening. And so you know that when the media doesn't pick up on it, it's a choice they're making. It's a choice they're making to ignore it. And one of those things are threats to democracy from Democrats. And I'm talking specifically about Washington State. You know, you'll hear Bob Ferguson and other Democrats and the chair of the state Democratic Party talk about Donald Trump being an existential threat to our very existence as a nation and to our democracy and our democratic republic. And now, I'm not saying that there aren't things to be worried about former President Donald Trump. Yeah, I think the media had every right to look at what happened on January 6th, 3 years ago, and be like, that was scary stuff. I agree it was scary stuff. But I am unable to take them seriously when they're constantly talking about Donald Trump and Republicans being a threat to democracy and acting like that is such a big issue. And then absolutely ignoring at the very same time obvious efforts to undermine our democracy from Democrats. Again, like, you can talk about Trump and concerns about the threats he poses to our country and democracy, but I'm not going to take you seriously unless you're also talking about things that Democrats are doing to undermine our democracy. As a journalist, you can and should be doing both. Picking and choosing just shows your bias. And there are so many examples just in the last few months, really in the first 8 months of the year, that show that Democrats in our state are increasingly emboldened to try to undermine our democratic process. One example is just this week with a group called Defend Washington that sued over the initiatives trying to disenfranchise 1.2 million Washington voters who signed their names to those initiatives, trying to make sure that you don't even have a chance to vote. That's what they want. It's not about beating the yes on the initiatives at the ballot box. That's one thing. They have every right in the world to try to sell their case and say, we want you to vote no on these things. This lawsuit was about keeping them off the ballot altogether. How terrifying is that? They didn't even want you to be able to vote. Is that not an attack on our democracy? And in case you're wondering, well, is Defend Washington a Democratic organization? Yes, they are. They're a very progressive organization. And one of their funders, as we described in detail on the show yesterday, is Nick Hanauer of Civic Ventures. He's the #1 contributor to Defend Washington. He's also a big contributor to Attorney General Bob Ferguson, a Democrat who is the front runner to become the next governor of the state of Washington. And it's really no surprise that Nick Hanauer would support Bob Ferguson and support a group that is trying to undermine our democracy, because Bob Ferguson is also trying to undermine our democracy. You'll recall that he came out on television and asked the Secretary of State to break election law for him.
So we're asking the Secretary of State to either move my name up, sort of second essentially, above those two, or move them down below me.
And why wouldn't Bob Ferguson get on TV, in front of TV cameras, and explicitly ask the Secretary of State of his own party to break election law on his behalf? Why wouldn't he think he can get away with that when his own party has gotten away with really terrifying words and actions about undermining our democratic process for the better part of a year? You'll recall when we were collecting signatures for the initiatives, what did the Democratic Party do and what did progressive organizations do? They started tip lines, snitch lines. They pushed them out and said, if you see someone gathering signatures, what they're doing is harmful. We have to fight back. They said, call us and report a signature gatherer. Let us know what they're wearing. Take pictures of them. Is it any surprise then that some signature gatherers were harassed, that in at least one instance, a woman crossed out signatures? The Democratic Party and groups like Fuse Washington were encouraging it, encouraging the harassment of people who were lawfully collecting signatures, a right afforded to them under our state constitution. And that's not worthy of the media talking about? That's not an attack, a terrifying attack on our democracy? I'd also go back to Speaker of the House Lori Jenkins when those initiatives qualified to be sent to the legislature. What did she say about, again, this initiative process that is an important part of our democracy? She said she was saddened by what it had become.
I'm very saddened when I think about why the initiative process was established in this state. Now what do we have is an ultra-wealthy multimillionaire buying his way onto the ballot and putting initiatives on the ballot that are going to benefit his ultra-wealthy status.
Yeah, never mind the 1.2 million voters who signed their names to those initiatives as part of the democratic process. So again, talk about Donald Trump. Let's talk about reasonable concerns you have about what happened, 3.5 years ago, whether it could happen again. I'm fine. It's your job as the media to hold powerful people accountable and to be concerned about the future of our country. But I refuse to take you seriously when you ignore an attorney general, the state's chief law enforcer, who asked the Secretary of State to break the law. I refuse to take you seriously when you don't call out progressive groups who right now are trying to use lawfare to keep Washington voters from being able to decide on the initiatives. I refuse to take you seriously when you don't see and say anything about the Democratic Party that is actively attacking the initiative process and saying they're saddened by it, etc. etc. And then they just get away with it. And so then they're more emboldened, hey, keep talking about how Donald Trump's a threat to our democracy. Well, we actively try to consolidate our power and undermine our democracy. And just the latest example of this, it just came out yesterday. This is from the Washington State Standard. The Washington Democratic Party right now is pushing to keep RFK Jr. off the ballot. I mean, they don't even want, again, they don't want you to have a choice. They do not want you to have a choice to choose RFK Jr. over their choice, Kamala Harris. So they're attacking our democracy and trying to keep RFK Jr. off the ballot, according to the Standard. The group contends the 4,181 signatures submitted by We the People, a group in support of Kennedy's nomination, were not collected at a party convention as required by state law, making him ineligible to be one of the voters' choices. Kennedy's campaign website listed various events and locations, like the Olympia Farmers Market, where registered voters could sign nomination petitions, but that doesn't comport with the law's requirement, Democratic Party lawyers argued. Washington law says a convention can be a meeting of as few as 100 registered voters. If there are multiple conventions, each must have its own notice. While We the People submitted affidavits showing public notices for conventions, it did not hold any, Democratic Party lawyers argue in their letter. So again, you can't just let voters have a choice. Like here, they collected signatures to be able to get RFK Jr. on the ballot because there were some Washington voters here who wanted to have him as a choice. But the Democratic Party, very content and confident in the fact that it can try to undermine our democratic process without the media calling them out on it, is going to try to remove him from the ballot because they do not want you to have a choice. They do not want you to be able to fully exercise your rights as part of this country, this state, as voters. So tell me again, how does this make sense to anyone? Am I going crazy? Tell me if I'm going crazy. Nicole, am I going crazy?
I don't believe so.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I'm crazy, but
I know,
not about
you've
this.
already gone crazy, but not about this.
Now I'm full-blown mental. I mean, again, there's a lot of I think sometimes there is TDS in the media where they go way too far with Donald Trump and picking him apart, but I would rather that than this. I would rather you go way too far and you're way too harsh on people in power than completely ignoring everything nefarious that they do. So spare me the democracy in peril bullshit until you are willing to look at all the ways that the Democratic Party in our state is putting our democracy in peril.